Hey everybody, welcome to episode 6 of Startups and Code. I'm your host, John Mann, and today's episode we're going to be talking about communication. And I'm going to focus on different communication styles, all the different tools and mediums that we have in today's world for communication, and then identifying, like I love process, communication as a process and how to actually improve that process over time. Certain things of communication will be more beneficial using certain mediums, and then understanding your audience and things like that. So let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about communication styles. There are various communication styles that people have. Some people talk a lot with their hands, like this. Some people are very direct and very succinct in their communication. And then some people like to, what I call, tell the story, or they're the narrative types of speakers. And I think all of those are actually valuable depending on what your message is. So let's focus on the different types of communication styles. There's direct, there's indirect, there's passive, which is very interesting term to describe a type of communication. And then of course there's aggressive, right? So passive and aggressive obviously are opposites of each other. You'll have the somebody who sits in the back and actually talks about things behind under their breath or very, very subtly or make a slide comment here and there. And then there's the aggressive type of communication who is would be more aligned with a very direct and very assertive or even beyond that to an aggressive standpoint. But all of that is neither here nor there. The real reason you need to understand about communication styles is how you can communicate your message successfully to the individuals that are listening to you. That's what's really hard because everyone has their own filters and everyone processes information differently. And people don't realize that the way one person processes the information and the way another person processes the information will actually be different, even though the message is identical. And it is because of our experiences and the way we've interpreted things in the past and things that have happened to us and things we have been through and the way previous communications have interacted with that individual. And all of that put together makes up our own personal filters. So if I were to say, I'd really like you to work on this project this week, that could be interpreted as, oh, okay, so maybe by Thursday or Friday, I'll take a look at it. Another person would be like, oh my gosh, this is the most important thing. I need to finish that today. And then another person will be like, oh, he wants to, but I'm sure there's other priorities that are in my mind that I want to work on that are probably not aligned. And exact same message. I'd like you to work on this project this week. That was very interesting on the way I worded that, right? It's something I would like. It was a time frame of this week, but it didn't have the sense of urgency. It didn't have the sense of importance. So that individual could have processed it many different ways. So sometimes it's very important to set specific deadlines when you're communicating something. A great example is, let's say you have a feature that you're working on and you know there's a deadline involved, but that deadline generally is very fluid depending on the team that you're on. You need to have a hard deadline. If you do not have a hard deadline, then that deadline will go whooshing past every time. And it's like, oh, I'll get to it next week. Oh, there was something that was a higher priority. So that communication style is very important to be direct. I need this done by Tuesday at 3 p.m. And a lot of people will use end of day, right? And or end of week. Well, what is actually end of week? Is that Saturday at midnight? Or is that 5 p.m. on a Friday? Or is that 3 p.m. on a Friday? So I have still some time to review it before the end of the week. So it's important to use time frames and goals and being able to set those types of priorities for people. If you don't have those deadlines, nothing else will matter in regards to the communication because no one will make it a priority until you actually create that sense of urgency. Now, let's talk about the uh, aggressive approach to things. You need to do this now. Very aggressive. Definitely a timeline. The timeline is immediate, right? And that type of communication will work in certain environments. And everyone's like, oh, people are motivated by different things. So let me talk a little bit about what motivates people. I learned this a long time ago back in college in this leadership class I took. And people are motivated by four things: fear, reward, respect, and conviction. That's it. And if you think about it, you're like, wow, it really is that simple. Fear, obviously, people will do things for their own self preservation. That's the number one motivating factor in anybody's life. That's why we have survived as long as we have, because, hey, if I do this, I will live longer. Okay, I'm going to go do that. Reward is obvious. Reward is very common in a workplace. People are like, oh, but I don't get rewarded. You get a paycheck. That's your reward. And you need to understand you work so you can actually continually to get a paycheck. Respect. When somebody actually is doing something or asks you for a favor and you actually respect that individual and you know that they're asking for it and you respect that they're asking for a valid reason because you respect that individual, you'll go ahead and perform that task, whatever it may be. And then conviction. Regardless of if anyone asks you or doesn't ask you or whatever, you know the right thing to do and you're going to do the right thing. That's just conviction. You know that it's the right thing to do, so you're going to actually focus on that and you're going to do that. And those are the four motivating factors. Obviously, some of those tactics will not work in a corporate or company environment. Don't recommend motivating people out of fear. If you do that, you will have a retention rate of lower than 50%, I can almost guarantee you. However, you might get a really high productivity rate for those 2 to 3 weeks that you have those people working. But you won't have a team in about 2 to 3 weeks. So I don't recommend that. Reward, hopefully you're paying your employees, so reward should actually be there. But there's other kinds of rewards that people don't think about. So when you're communicating urgency for a task, or you're working on uh, specific projects or something that's happening. Realize what motivates that individual. Some people don't like public praise, so you might want to go one on one and say, hey, why don't you take the next couple of days off? And just give them time, right? Time is the most valuable resource that we can never actually get back. So think about giving people time as a reward. Money is obviously an easy motivator, but there's other smaller things you can do. Take them to lunch, take them to coffee, um, create a fun environment for the actual team as a whole. That alone could be a reward as a team collective. So those are the reward kind of concepts. Now, respect obviously is something that you're going to have to build over time. You can't just walk into a place and say, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing. I'm going to respect him. Um, but as you build your trust, you'll build your respect, and it's basically repetitive of the actions that you're performing, right? You got to do something, you actually follow through and do it. If you can't do something, you actually let them know that why you can't and explain to them and take the time and take a sincere interest in not only in the work that they're producing, but take an interest in what they're actually wanting to do. And I think that's the most important part in regards to communication with your team is not everyone will have the same interests, right? So you want to be able to give them the right motivations to build their career, give them new skills, help them learn, help them be motivated by what they're creating, and have them go down a path, right? And you want that path to be something that they've created with you, not you're directing them to do something. You want to build that in collaboration with them and at the individual level, not as a collective team. Because one engineer might want to go down this senior management route, and another person wants to never manage people and just go down an individual contributor route. And those are the different types of motivations that you want to consider on rewarding your team and actually having them respect you. And then obviously, conviction is something that you'll hopefully hire the right people and know that, hey, this is the right thing to do. This will actually help our code in the long run. We're going to actually move in this direction. And that comes as the interview process to identify what their goals are and what their actual motivations are. That's going to be a whole separate podcast about interviewing and how to interview and hire for the right team members. Um, in regards to this, though, let's talk about the different communication tools and mediums that we have. So, in recent technology, we have email, we have Slack, we have Zoom, we have phone calls, we have in-person one-on-ones, we have in-person group conversation, we have text messages, and then of course we have the wonderful world of social media. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of those. Those are all levels of communication. This alone, this podcast here, is a level of communication. And that level of communication will not necessarily be interactive. However, it's still a level of me communicating information to you. All right, I'm back. Sorry, packages happen, deliveries happen, and dogs happen. So that's life. All right, moving on. So different, definitely various kinds of tools that we have and different types of uh, communication levels, right? And keep in mind that your tone may or may not be delivered correctly when you're actually doing things in text message compared to face or in person. There is a saying that 90% of communication is nonverbal. So if that's actually a true statistic, then you got to keep in mind if you're sending a text message, how is that information actually being conveyed? So you're only conveying 10% of your actual message. So when you're delivering something in different mediums, you need to consider uh, who your audience is. Who are you delivering this to? Is it a coworker? Is it your CEO? Is it a friend of yours? Like we all have different kinds of communication, not just corporate communication or work communication, but we also like talk to family, talk to friends, especially around the holiday season. There's a lot of communication that happens, but know your audience and know the tone that you want to convey that message, right? And then when you understand what you're actually doing in regards to the tone, then you need to think about the medium you're going to use to convey that message. So if I type something really quick in Slack, am I conveying the message that I want them to actually hear? And how can I make sure that they're interpreting it the way I want it delivered? And a lot of times it's just a simple synopsis. You're like, hey, this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm asking. Do you understand? And they can say yes or no. And then you're like, great. So we're all on the same page. Summarize, right? Summaries are really, really critical for people to succinctly understand what the message is and what the goal is from that message. Sometimes it's just, how are you doing, right? Sometimes it's, here's a list of product features that we need by the end of the month. Here's a list of design specs that we have, and we're really hoping we get all this done by the end of the month, right? And those would be a lot more detailed communications rather than just asking someone how their weekend was. And then understand the message that you're actually conveying. When you know your audience and you know your medium and you know your message, you're going to be ahead of the game in regards to the level of communication and making sure that that information is being delivered correctly and understood. And I think that's one of the big problems in a lot of corporate worlds is people will just send a quick Slack message and say, hey, did you check this? And there's no context given. And then people are like, why didn't you respond to my Slack? Well, I was out of the office because I was homesick, or I was on PTO, or I was actually working on 5 other projects, things like that. But the asynchronous communication that happens in things like Slack and text, there is a certain level of expectation that a response is going to occur. And now that takes me to the final topic that I want to cover today, which is communication etiquette. If someone actually asks you something, respond and actually answer the question. I know that sounds complicated, um, because if you watch any type of um, general debate, let's just use, since it's going to be an election year, uh, politicians never directly answer the question. It is really fascinating how much redirect they do to get back to the topics that they want to discuss. So if I ask, do you think this project will be finished by the end of the day? Well, there's a lot of things that I'm working on, and I know there's some other priorities. And I think that if I finish this and I look at this, I think these other projects are going to be a higher priority. Like, never answer the question. The answer to that question is no, I don't, because I have other priorities, right? But no one wants to say no. They want to redirect, soften the blow, do whatever it takes to actually pretend that they're going to provide a solution. However, sometimes the solution is no, right? And when someone asks you a question, make sure you answer the question. Etiquette 101 of communication, right? Then, if someone's asking you something and you're not sure you understand it, reiterate what they're asking in your own words, right? Because if you ask it in your own words, then they might actually process their own question differently. So, step one, make sure you answer the question if it's being asked. And step two, summarize what they're asking to make sure that you understand the question. And then the final step three is listen, which really should be step one. You should always listen to what the other person is saying. Don't talk over them. Don't have five people talking at once. If you're in a conference and there's 10 people in that room, there should only be one speaker at a time. Side conversations exclude people, and information is not being shared. And therefore, those other people that are having those side conversations don't necessarily even need to be in the room then. So you got to realize who's going to be coming to those group meetings, who's going to be participating in them, and making sure that the information is disseminated appropriately. But there should only be one speaker at a time and give people an opportunity to actually respond. One of the common tactics of communication is always let the quiet people speak first, because the loud people will always speak. Don't worry, they'll take the room. They'll be more than happy to respond. So wait, call on the people that are less likely to share. Get them involved, get them engaged. And they probably have great ideas or great insights to what you're trying to work on together. But you can't let certain people, certain personalities dominate a conversation. So give them the opportunity to communicate. And then listen to those ideas, and then don't worry, the loud voices will always come back. Trust me, that's just the personalities that they are, which is great, right? You need that balance. You need those different types of personalities, and that diversity actually helps create a lot more innovative solutions from my experience. And I think that's about it. I'm going to make this one a little bit shorter than usual. I hope that wraps up everything for 2023. We're about to be in 2024. Yay! Um, Let me know your thoughts on communication and some of the things I've covered. I made this one pretty quick, so this isn't going to be a long, drawn out one. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know your comments. I'd love to hear from you. And thanks for tuning in, and have a great weekend.